welcome to the Clinical Trials podcast series by Empower Clinics, where we explore the fascinating world of Empower's research and clinical trials initiative. This is episode 2, where we will cover the basics of research and clinical trials. Welcome back to the podcast. With me, I have Steve McCauley. He is the chairman and CEO of Empower Clinics. Empower is an integrated healthcare company with multidisciplinary clinics, a Canadian medical device company, and has launched its first clinical research site, becoming a site management organization in Dallas, Texas. Empower is a leader in integrated healthcare and research solutions and is reshaping the model for patient-first wellness. I am Regina, your host, and thank you, Steve, for joining us one more time. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
We have a lot to cover in this episode, so let's just get started with it right away. Why don't you lead us through what really is a clinical study?
Great. Let's start with that question. So a clinical study involves research using human volunteers, also called participants, that is intended to add to medical knowledge. There are two main types of clinical studies: clinical trials, also called interventional studies, and observational studies. Additional information on clinical trials can be found at, say, clinicaltrials.gov. It's a great website for information, and it includes both interventional and observational study information. So, for clinical trials, in a clinical trial, participants receive specific interventions according to a research plan or protocol that is created by the investigators. These interventions may be medical products such as drugs or devices, procedures, or changes to participants' behavior such as diet. Clinical trials may compare a new medical approach to a standard one that is already available, to a placebo that contains no active ingredients, or to no intervention. Some clinical trials compare interventions that are already available to each other. When a new product or approach is being studied, it's not only whether it will be helpful, harmful, or no different than available alternatives, including no intervention. The investigators try to determine the safety and efficacy of intervention by measuring certain outcomes in the participants. For example, investigators may give a drug or a treatment to participants who have high blood pressure to see whether their blood pressure decreases. Clinical trials used in drug development are sometimes described by phase. These phases are defined by the Food and Drug Administration in the United States. Some people who are not eligible to participate in a clinical trial may be able to get experimental drugs or devices outside of the clinical trial through expanded access. There is more information on expanded access from the FDA, and we will include a link in our blog post as well. Now, observational studies. In an observational study, investigators assess health outcomes in groups of participants according to a research plan or protocol. Participants may receive interventions which can include medical products such as drugs or devices, or procedures as part of their routine medical care. But participants are not assigned to specific interventions by the investigator as in a clinical trial. For example, investigators may observe a group of older adults to learn more about the effects of different lifestyles on cardiac health, as one example.
Okay, so that's covering what they really are, and it's a big topic. So let's shift the conversation a little bit and talk about who's conducting these clinical studies.
Yeah, every clinical study is led by a principal investigator, who is commonly a medical doctor. Clinical studies also have a research team that may include doctors, nurses, social workers, and other healthcare professionals. Clinical studies can be sponsored or funded by pharmaceutical companies, academic medical centers, voluntary groups, or other organizations, in addition to federal agencies such as National Institutes of Health and the U.S. Department of Defense and the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Doctors, other healthcare providers, and other individuals can also sponsor clinical research.
Okay, so tell us, where are the clinical studies being conducted?
So clinical studies can take place in many locations, including hospitals, universities, doctors' offices, and community clinics. The location depends on who is conducting the study.
Okay, so I'm sure our listeners are wondering, how long does a clinical study last?
Well, the length of a clinical study varies greatly, depending on what is being studied. Participants are told how long the study will last before they enroll. Typically, the phase of the clinical study is really going to be a determinant of how long the study will last. Early phase ones tend to be shorter with smaller focus groups. And as you get through different phases, they become longer, and the population of participants tends to be much larger.
Okay, so walk me through what would be some of the reasons that one would conduct a clinical study?
In general, clinical studies are designed to add to medical knowledge related to the treatment, diagnosis, and prevention of diseases or conditions. Some common reasons for conducting clinical studies include evaluating one or more interventions, for example, drugs or medical devices or approaches to surgery or radiation therapy to treat disease, a syndrome, or a condition. Finding ways to prevent the initial development or reoccurrence of a disease or a condition is another consideration. These can include, again, medicines, vaccines, or lifestyle changes, among other approaches. Also, evaluating one or more interventions aimed at identifying or diagnosing a particular disease or condition. Further, examining methods for identifying a condition or the risk factors associated with that condition. Finally, exploring and measuring ways to improve the comfort, quality of life through supportive care for people with chronic illness.
Okay, so there's a lot there, and it seems like it would be a significant effort. Now, answer for us, how does someone become eligible to participate in a clinical study?
Well, a clinical study is conducted according to a research plan known as the protocol. The protocol is designed to answer specific research questions and safeguard the health of participants. It can contain, some of the following information. So what is the reason for conducting the study? Who may participate in the study, and what is the eligibility criteria? What is the number of participants needed to gather enough data for the study? What is the schedule of tests, procedures, or drugs and their dosages for the study? What is the length of the study, and what information will be gathered about the participants along the way?
Okay, so who can participate in a clinical study?
So clinical studies have standards outlined who can participate. These standards are called eligibility criteria and are listed in the protocol. Some research studies seek participants who have the illnesses or conditions that will be studied. Other studies are looking for healthy participants, and some studies are limited to a predetermined group of people who are asked by researchers to enroll. Now, for eligibility, the factors that allow someone to participate in a clinical trial are called inclusion criteria, and these factors that disqualify someone from participating are called exclusion criteria. They are based on characteristics such as age, gender, the type and stage of a disease, previous treatment history, and other medical conditions.
How are these participants protected?
Yeah, great question. So informed consent is a process used by researchers to provide potential and enrolled participants with information about a clinical study. This information helps people decide whether they want to enroll or continue to participate in the study. The informed consent process is intended to protect participants and should provide enough information for a person to understand the risks of, potential benefits of, and alternatives to the study. In addition to the informed consent document, the process may involve recruitment materials, verbal instructions, question and answer sessions, and activities to measure participant understanding. In general, a person must sign an informed consent document before joining the study to show that he or she was given information on the risks, potential benefits, and alternatives, and that he or she understands it. Signing the document and providing consent is not a contract. Participants may withdraw from a study at any time, even if the study is not over. The key here is to really, for the participant to ask questions, ask the healthcare provider or researcher about participating in the clinical study, really making sure they understand all the considerations and risks and benefits to them.
And it's good to understand that they can change their mind and no longer want to be a part of participants. They have that option. Like you said, it's not a contract. So that's a good piece to understand there. Now, tell us a little bit about what an institutional review board is.
Yeah, so each federally supported or conducted clinical trial and each study of a drug or biological product or medical device regulated by the FDA must be reviewed, approved, and monitored by an institutional review board, or sometimes referred to as an IRB. An IRB is made up of doctors, researchers, and members of the community. Its role is to make sure that the study is ethical and that the rights and welfare of participants are protected. This includes making sure that research risks are minimized and are reasonable in relation to the potential benefits, among other responsibilities. The IRB also reviews the informed consent document. In addition to being monitored by an IRB, some clinical studies are also monitored by data monitoring committees, also called data safety and monitoring boards. Various federal agencies, including the Office of Human Subjects Research Protection and FDA, have the authority to determine whether sponsors of certain clinical studies are adequately protecting research participants.
Okay, so there is a process there to keep everyone protected. Now, tell me a little bit about how is the relationship to usual healthcare maintained?
Okay, so typically participants continue to see their usual or normal healthcare providers while enrolled in a clinical study. While most clinical studies provide participants with medical products or interventions related to the illness or condition being studied, they do not provide their normal, extended, or complete healthcare. By having his or her usual healthcare provider work with a research team, a participant can make sure that the study protocol will not conflict with other medications or treatments that he or she receives. Oftentimes, patients who participate in the study may have, conflicting comorbidities that need to be, carefully monitored and paid attention to. So maintaining sort of your normal, usual healthcare protocols and relationships with your medical doctor is imperative.
Yeah, very interesting. What are some of the key considerations for participation?
So participating in a clinical study contributes to medical knowledge. These results of these studies can make a difference in the care of future patients by providing information about the benefits and risks of therapeutic, preventative, or diagnostic products or interventions. Clinical trials provide the basis for the development and marketing of new drugs, biological products, and medical devices. Sometimes the safety and effectiveness of the experimental approach or use may not be fully known at the time of the trial. Some trials may provide participants with the prospect of receiving direct medical benefits, while others do not. Most trials involve some risk of harm or injury to the participant, although it may not be greater than the risks related to routine medical care or disease progression. For trials approved by IRBs, the IRB has decided that the risk of participation have been minimized and are reasonable in relation to the associated benefits. Many trials require participants to undergo additional procedures, tests, and assessments based on the study protocol. These requirements will be described in the informed consent document. Potential participants should also discuss these issues with members of the research team and with his or her usual healthcare provider.
Okay, so if one of our listeners is considering becoming a participant, what would be some of the questions that he or she may want to ask?
Yeah, there are a lot of questions that should be asked. Anyone interested in participating in a clinical study should know as much as possible about the study and feel comfortable asking the research team questions related to procedures and any expenses. Here are some of the following questions that, should come up in discussion. Answers to some questions, are provided in the informed consent document. Many of the questions are specific to clinical trials, but some also apply to observational studies. So, some considerations to think about are questions like, what is being studied? Why do researchers believe the intervention being tested might be effective? Why might it not be effective, and has it been tested before? What are the possible interventions that I might receive during the trial, and how will it be determined which interventions I will receive? For example, is it by chance? Who will know which intervention I receive during the trial? Will I know? Will members of the research team know? How do the possible risks, side effects, and benefits of this trial compare with those of my current treatment? What will I have to do? What tests and procedures are involved? How often will I have to visit the hospital or clinic? Will hospitalization be required? How long will the study last? Who will pay for my participation? Will I be reimbursed for other expenses? What type of long-term follow-up care is part of this trial? If I benefit from the intervention, will I be allowed to continue receiving it after the trial ends? Will results of the study be provided to me? Who will oversee my medical care while I am participating in the trial? What are my options if I'm injured during the study? These are just some of the few critical questions that should be asked by potential participants. Again, the research team and those overseeing it, such as Empower Clinics and our site management organization, these are some of the key interactions that we would have with participants on behalf of the overall study.
We covered a lot of ground here, so thank you for being here and walking us through, especially the questions. I think those are very important for our listeners to understand so the participants can think about some of the questions that they might want to ask if this is something that they would like to do. Thank you for being here, Steve, and thank you for listening to episode 2 of the Clinical Trials podcast series by Empower Clinics. We hope that this episode provided you with valuable insight. Thank you, Steve, for being here and sharing your expertise. And join us in our upcoming episodes where we will delve deeper into the world of clinical trials with an educational discussion about acronyms and definitions. Thank you for listening, and we hope to have you back for episode 3. I am your host, Regina, from Pulse IR by Phoebe. For more information, please visit pulseir.com, and see you next time.